In the heart of Berlin, a patch of ground lies forgotten, its grass overgrown, and its silence absolute. But this quiet place holds a story woven from shadow and legend, for it is the final resting place of Reinhard Heydrich, the Butcher of Prague, one of the most feared architects of the Nazi regime. For decades after his death, the tomb was left to the creeping vines in the stillness of history. Then, on a cold December night in 2019, that stillness was broken. The sanctity of the grave was violated by unknown hands, driven by a motive that remains shrouded in mystery, as they searched for something no one can name. What could they have been hunting for, there in the dark earth beside the remains of a man who embodied such absolute evil? A fabled sword, perhaps? Nazi relics of incalculable value? Or was their desperate search for nothing more than the profound and chilling emptiness he left behind? In the Reich's dark carousel of power, some men were instruments of terror. One man, however, was its chief architect. Reinhard Heydrich was no mere officer in the sprawling Nazi hierarchy. He was a singular force, Heinrich Himmler's right hand, and the cold, calculating mind behind the regime's machinery of repression. While Hitler offered the ideological fire and Himmler commanded the vast structure of the SS, Heydrich was the meticulous executor who translated abstract hatred into concrete, operational plans of extermination. Under his direct command were the three pillars of Nazi dread. The Gestapo, his secret state police, worked to pulverize dissent and sow a permanent climate of paranoia. The SD, his intelligence service, spied not only on foreign enemies but on German citizens themselves, its tendrils reaching into every corner of society. And the Kripo, the criminal police, served as an auxiliary arm for persecuting anyone deemed undesirable. Heydrich viewed these not as separate entities, but as interlocking gears in a single, perfectly synchronized machine of fear. As Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, the lands of the modern-day Czech Republic, he governed with a chilling blend of administrative precision and overt brutality. His policies were designed to be exemplary lessons in subjugation. The slightest act of resistance was met with public executions staged for maximum intimidation, while mass deportations shattered the foundations of entire communities. The air itself seemed thick with psychological tension, and the local population soon gave him a name that fit his work, the Butcher of Prague. Yet his cruelty in the occupied territories was merely a prelude. Reinhard Heydrich was a principal architect of the final solution, the systematic annihilation of Europe's Jewish population. In January of 1942, he presided over the Wannsee Conference, where he laid out the logistical minutiae of deportation and mass murder. This was not just a policy of hate, it was a bureaucratically structured operation of staggering scale. His genius was in turning genocide into tables, reports, and official orders, transforming the unspeakable into the mundane. In the gilded halls of the Third Reich, he was a man of chilling contradictions. A figure of administrative rationality in the service of absolute barbarism, Reinhard Heydrich cultivated the image of a modern aristocrat. He could masterfully draw a bow across a violin, a skill honed since his youth, or deftly pilot an aircraft on a hunt. At official functions, his manners were impeccable, his conversation flowing from literature to classical music, projecting an aura of elegant sophistication. This polished veneer, however, served only to deepen the abyss between the man and the monster. It was a terrifying demonstration of how barbarity could wear the mask of civilization, the two coexisting in a perfect, horrifying symmetry. Adolf Hitler saw more than a loyal subordinate. He saw a potential successor, young, ambitious, and ruthlessly efficient. Heydrich's ice-cold discipline and his capacity for swift, brutal decisions deeply impressed the Führer, who recognized in him a spirit of steel, free from the burden of moral hesitation. For Heinrich Himmler, he was simply indispensable. If Himmler was the meticulous ideologue of the SS, Heydrich was the pragmatic executor, the one man capable of transforming the darkest Nazi visions into administrative reality. Together with Hitler and Himmler, he formed a trinity of terror, acting as the unseen architect behind the regime's most lethal operations. He symbolized the fusion of radical ideology with bureaucratic calculation and military efficiency. He was the modern state, with all its power to organize, to catalog, and to transport, placed entirely at the service of mass destruction. Heydrich was the human face of this mechanism, the cold arithmetic of extermination made flesh. But no tyranny is eternal, and for Reinhard Heydrich, the time of absolute power would run out unexpectedly, explosively, in a spring that would forever alter the fate of the Nazi occupation in Europe. In the fragile light of a spring morning, the old city of Prague held its breath. On the 27th of May, 1942, sunlight spilled across the ancient rooftops, yet failed to warm the stone or dispel the chilling shadow of Nazi occupation. Beneath a veneer of forced routine, a spark of resistance smoldered, waiting for the right moment to ignite. At a sharp bend in the road, two men stood in silence. They were Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš, Czechoslovak agents trained in Britain and returned to their homeland for a single monumental purpose. Their mission was to eliminate Reinhard Heydrich, the Reich protector of Bohemia and Moravia, the architect of the final solution, and a man whose cruelty was second only to Hitler and Himmler. For them, there was no turning back. Their target approached in a dark green open-top Mercedes-Benz, cruising without its hood as if on a victory parade. It was a gesture of supreme arrogance, a belief in his own invincibility. Unlike other high-ranking Nazi officials, Heydrich disdained military escorts, convinced that the terror he inspired was his surest protection. This profound overconfidence was about to become his greatest vulnerability. As the car slowed for the hairpin turn, Gabčík emerged from his hiding place, his Sten submachine gun leveled directly at the Butcher of Prague. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop, but the only sound was a dead metallic click. The weapon had jammed. Stunned, Heydrich reacted not with fear but with fury, ordering his driver to halt and drawing his own Luger pistol to confront his attackers. That moment of defiance sealed his fate. Seeing his partner's failure, Jan Kubiš acted instantly. Pulling an anti-tank grenade from his briefcase, he hurled it with all his might toward the vehicle. The resulting explosion tore through the car's rear panel, sending a lethal spray of metal and upholstery deep into Heydrich's body, shredding his diaphragm, spleen, and one of his lungs. Even in agony, bleeding and stumbling from the wreckage, Heydrich tried to raise his weapon, a final futile act of authority. But his strength gave out, and the man who saw himself as indestructible collapsed onto the pavement. Rushed to a Prague hospital, he underwent emergency surgery as doctors fought desperately to save Hitler's iron heart. For a few hours, it seemed he might survive. He was conscious and spoke with confidence of his recovery. But an unseen enemy was already at work. Infection crept into his deep internal wounds, and with mass-produced antibiotics still a thing of the future, septicemia took hold. His fever climbed, his breathing grew labored, and the body that symbolized cold Nazi efficiency began to consume itself from within. After 8 days of agony, on the 4th of June, Reinhard Heydrich was dead. His fall was a testament that even the most absolute power is never truly immune to fate. The blow had been struck, and the Reich would answer not with justice, but with fire. History teaches that even the most powerful are not immune to fate, and the reaction from Berlin was immediate and devastating. Hitler and Himmler demanded a vengeance without limits, a wave of terror to be unleashed on a national scale as punishment for the attack on Heydrich. A tide of black-uniformed SS and Gestapo agents washed over Bohemia and Moravia, conducting thousands of summary executions. In the suffocating atmosphere of suspicion, a whispered accusation or a pointed finger was enough to justify a death warrant. The villages of Litis and Lejaki were chosen as terrible symbols of this fury, their fates sealed by the thirst for reprisal. In Litis, every man was systematically shot. The women were herded onto transports bound for the horrors of Ravensbrück, while their children were torn away, some to be Germanized, many more to perish. With its homes and churches dynamited into rubble, the very name of the village was scraped from the maps of the world. Lejaki suffered an identical fate, its memory turned to ash. Against this backdrop of slaughter, Heydrich's funeral was staged as a chilling spectacle of power. A procession carried his coffin through the silent streets of Prague, flanked by an SS honor guard and watched by a captive population. But the true performance of choreographed grief reached its zenith in Berlin, at Hitler's new Reich Chancellery. Surrounded by a forest of flickering torches and imperial standards, the Führer himself bestowed the German order upon the fallen officer, praising him as the man with an iron heart. Beside the casket stood Heydrich's two young sons, clad in miniature SS uniforms, living symbols of the brutal future the Reich intended to forge. The burial took place in Berlin's Invalidenfriedhof cemetery, marked by a simple cross and the crack of a final salute. Hitler promised a magnificent mausoleum would one day rise in his honor, a monument to be built after the final victory. It was a promise that, like the Reich itself, would dissolve into dust, leaving only a modest, silent grave. In the choking smoke of May 1945, the Third Reich drew its final ragged breath. Soviet troops advanced through the skeletal remains of Berlin, their progress measured not in miles, but in the settling of accounts, a fury born from years of atrocity and war. The symbols of a broken ideology were violently torn from the streets as monuments were dynamited and imperial eagles shattered under the rhythmic blows of hammers. The grand avenues, once pristine stages for the SS and the power choreographies conceived by Goebbels, were now choked with wrecked tanks and mountains of debris. The city of Hitler's architectural dreams, a vision of disciplined grandeur, had collapsed into a landscape of ash. A broken silence hung over the rubble, pierced only by the distant thunder of the war's last spasms. In this climate of total retribution, even the dead were not exempt from the judgment of history. The tombs of Nazi leaders were desecrated, their crosses splintered, their memorials erased from existence. Among these targets was Reinhard Heydrich, whose body had rested in the military cemetery at Waldenfriedhof since his assassination in 1942. The simple wooden cross marking his plot was ripped from the earth, erasing any visible reference to the man once exalted by the regime as a martyr. His final resting place sank into anonymity, reduced to a patch of nameless ground among thousands of untended graves. With the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961, the cemetery was sealed away in the eastern sector under the vigilant control of East German authorities. Now, physically and politically inaccessible, the burial site was purged from every map and public register. No name, no date, no record remained. Only a few historians and bureaucrats of the GDR, keepers of secret state documents, knew the precise location. For decades, dust and silence covered that small piece of land, as if the earth itself had swallowed the past, until a violation in December 2019. In the winter chill of December 2019, a heavy silence that had long settled over a Berlin military cemetery was finally broken. For 77 years, the grave of Reinhard Heydrich had rested in anonymity, but on this cold night, figures slipped through the darkness. With practiced efficiency, their shovels broke the frozen earth, not with the chaotic energy of vandals, but with the chilling precision of a planned operation. The official police report, in its dry bureaucratic language, recorded only the basic facts. The tomb had been opened, but nothing appeared to have been removed. Investigators found no evidence that the coffin itself was breached, suggesting the intruders were interrupted mid-task, forced to abandon a mission that was clearly long in the making. Yet it was obvious to all who surveyed the scene that this was not the work of amateurs, The excavation was surgical, guided by exact knowledge of the grave's location. After all, the SS Obergruppenführer had not been buried like an ordinary soldier. His state funeral was an elaborate display of Nazi pomp, his body dressed in a full uniform and adorned with every decoration he had earned. He was laid to rest in a reinforced coffin, a final bulwark for the man known as the Butcher of Prague. For decades, rumors had swirled that buried with him was a rare sword of honor, a personal gift from Heinrich Himmler, reserved for the most elite officers of the Reich. Such a piece would hold an almost mythical status, an object of immense historical and symbolic value that would ignite the greed of clandestine collectors and black market networks. But a more specific legend persisted among historians and treasure hunters that Himmler, in a gesture of dark devotion, had placed his own personal sword beside his protégé. If true, it would be a macabre relic linking two of the regime's chief architects, a material testament to the fanaticism that drove their machine of death. The precision of the dig lent this theory a terrifying weight. The invaders knew exactly what they were looking for, risking years in prison for a prize they deemed worthy of the gamble. But when the authorities arrived, they found only a violated tomb, a hole in the ground, and a disturbing quiet. The questions hung in the cold air, unanswered. There's a cruel irony in this lingering mystery. Heydrich, a man who controlled the fates of millions with calculated brutality, remains a source of speculation and fear long after his death. His reign left a trail of unimaginable destruction, yet his tomb keeps only shadows and secrets. In the end, history built no honorable monuments for him. It reserved only the enduring memory of his horror, a deep scar that does not fade. It is there, in that invisible territory of remembrance, that a form of justice continues to be served.